If one's favourite film of all time is to be defined as the film which summons the most love and adoration from a viewer in question, then sometimes I feel as though I would be most honest in naming 1933's King Kong as my favourite film of all time. Why King Kong? Why not anything else? It is because of everything that King Kong is. If you were to ask me what I am seeing in King Kong that you are not, the answer is nothing. With the exclusion of some dated racial stereotypes, everything within King Kong is the embodiment of that fabled sorcerous film escapism. Obviously, I can only speak for myself, but that mythical, often alluded to, much beloved quality of a feature film wherein it becomes a portal into an imaginative, absorbing, entrancing euphoric adventure, this is most manifest in my senses when I view King Kong. There are other candidates, but somehow I feel as though King Kong most reliably conjures this sensation in me. I mean, admit it. Deep down, as it begins, you hear the radio signal, Max Steiner's score creeps in, that intimidating brass, and then into the triumphant horn chorus when the film's title confronts us. Its insistence roars, "This will be an experience unlike any other." As was likely as not intended, one feels as though they are about to witness the greatest film of all time. A quick point of praise toward the sound of King Kong. It is not often cited enough, but King Kong was the first film to feature sound recorded on 3 separate tracks: the dialogue, the music, and the sound effects. Another audacious claim is that it was the first feature-length musical score written for an American talkie, period. Although I am unsure whether Max Steiner's work for that previous year's, 1932's, Bird of Paradise might be an earlier instance. Another claim is that it was the first Hollywood picture to have what is considered a thematic score, as opposed to background music. This might be considered a unique innovation, as Max Steiner's composition for Bird of Paradise might be considered background as opposed to thematic. I could consider either Bird of Paradise or King Kong to contain the first great sound film score, but especially King Kong, as it set an incredibly popular and iconic standard for the function of music in sound era cinema. Another early example of iconic talkie music which springs to my mind is that ominous opening theme for James Whale's Frankenstein. That is very classic. Where does one even get the idea for a film such as this? It is so iconic, it has made its mark on modern popular culture and then some, and yet it is just a story about a giant gorilla kidnapping a damsel and then being taken back to civilization. A little bit, or just like Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, right? Certainly in getting Willis O'Brien to compose the VFX as he had for the 1925 The Lost World adaptation, yes, very right. But the anecdote I remember reading concerns and is relayed by, if I remember correctly, Merian C. Cooper himself. He was wandering through New York City, noting the newly constructed, or currently then being constructed, Empire State Building, and he pondered how if a comparatively primitive human being was to be transported into this modern metropolis, he would instinctively climb atop the highest point, the Empire State, in shock and terror, and then they would have to call in the airplanes to bring him down. And so King Kong was born. Initially hired to pen this film's screenplay was the prolific and highly successful thriller author Edgar Wallace. Merian C. Cooper would essentially direct Wallace in writing the initial screenplay draft, approving it sequence by sequence. Edgar Wallace wrote about the reception of his screenplay. Cooper called me up last night and told me that everybody who had read Kong was enthusiastic. They say it is the best adventure story that has ever been written for the screen. He also wrote, "I am certain that Kong is going to be a wow." Unfortunately, Wallace passed away unexpectedly on the 10th of February 1932. In his initial workings, Wallace had the film opening with the production crew already at Skull Island, then called Vapor Island. He establishes the character of Denham, creates the archetypes to be used for the rest of the major cast, Anne, Driscoll, Eaglehorn, et al., and what they will do over the course of the plot. Although it is worth mentioning that Denham was written as a big game animal trapper rather than a filmmaker. So this is not a production crew, which as I mentioned earlier, this is just a ship crew. Where this draft differs from the finished film is not overwhelmingly significant. I'll note some distinctions. The crew arrive at the island apparently prematurely after their boat is attacked by a dinosaur, and when Kong takes Anne, it is after rescuing her from being assaulted by one of the crew's sailors. The other major difference to my knowledge is that Kong is actually killed when lightning strikes the flagpole that he's hanging onto, rather than from the bullets of the airplanes or the impact of that iconic fall. Wallace can be credited as introducing the Beauty and the Beast angle to the film's narrative, as well as the general plot beats and character roles. Merian C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack are said to have loved the screenplay, although they still required it to be rewritten as a functional shooting script with appropriate instructions and logistical planning. Cooper next recruited James Ashmore Creelman, at that time working on the screenplay for The Most Dangerous Game, and it said that Creelman's contributions include Denham becoming a film director rather than an animal hunter. Also, contributions were made from RKO staff writer Horace McCoy, who suggested the island natives, their giant wall, and Anne being a sacrifice to Kong. Someone saw Bird of Paradise, perhaps. An attempt at a final draft was overseen by Creelman, although Cooper was not ultimately happy with it. Ernest Schoedsack's wife, Ruth Rose, was brought in to complete some definitive rewrites. Though not a writer by trade or hobby, Rose, in her extensive up-close behind-the-scenes familiarity with Schoedsack and Cooper's film productions, was able to conceive a rendition of the Kong screenplay which was palatable, realizable, and accomplishable as a Hollywood film production. Ruth Rose, not motivated by passion or artistic integrity, was unattached and purely functionally, yet extremely efficiently, devoted to creatively realizing the King Kong project with business and economics in mind. That is, the prospect of what her husband was and wasn't capable of, and whether this film could be digestible, successful, and subsequently continue to put food on their table. Ruth Rose is credited specifically with devising that a simple cut would communicate the transportation of Kong from Skull Island to New York. The film's final decision would prove to have an insurmountable influence on film storytelling to come, enabling and empowering the idea that films did not need to communicate any more information than that which was relevant to the experience. These are not documentaries, these are not what-if machine portals, these are artistic spectacles. Maybe I am overstating this, although I wonder if this was something one would intuitively write into a screenplay for taste or convenience, or whether Rose, attempting to write for a reason of cynical efficiency, accidentally set a pivotal precedent for only revealing the relevant information within a film's overall storyline. What I mean by this is essentially, how would one have the audacity to not explain how they're able to transport Kong from Skull Island to New York City? It doesn't matter, as Ruth Rose claims, and it clearly doesn't. We all love King Kong, and we don't even question how they managed to transport Kong from Skull Island to New York City. Frankly, we don't care. Also, although Carl Denham had been made a film director in Creelman's draft, Ruth Rose chose to base him on Merian C. Cooper specifically. She probably thought it would be a waste not to. And then, believe it or not, whilst the name of Kong being Kong exists in prior screenplay drafts, Ruth Rose would appear to be the one who devised the truly immortal title of King Kong. Cooper loved Rose's work on the film's script, and they felt confident in finally getting production underway. It has been written that Cooper oversaw the direction of the VFX sequences, whereas Schoedsack, having more experience in the role, handled the direction of the cast scenes. I have to say, I think about how key the character of Carl Denham is to King Kong. Someone ought to write an essay titled, Filmmaker as the Beast, King Kong Dilated. Think about the King Kong narrative and Carl Denham's placement in it as allegorical for the filmmaking process itself. I'll end that thought here, because that is an abyss which I don't care to get lost in right now. I cannot even begin to praise this film's visual effects. What astonishes me still is how this film's final form is still an ostensible compromise from its creator's initial aspirations. This film's various scripted incarnations featured all manner of elaborate and ambitious dinosaur set pieces. Kong was to do battle with a Triceratops or three, then in New York he was to destroy a big poker party of some kind, and, most legendarily, enabled the devouring of certain unlucky sailors by some sadistic creepy crawlies. The infamous, may or may not have been filmed, spider pit sequence. I wager this film is maybe 40% what they actually imagined it to be. They were anticipating an imaginative fluidity the likes of which could only be achieved through reading novelized genre adventure pulp, although found themselves ultimately grounded and enabled by the realization of the lost world via Willis O'Brien's brilliant stop-motion animation. Skull Island was intended as the most vivid, evocative portal into another world ever realized in film, or fiction, history. In this they wholly succeeded. Never mind all of the brilliant dinosaur effects, never mind the lusciously expensive rich jungle sets engulfing the frames. Just listen to that glorious background music. Diegetic sound at its very best. 1933's King Kong truly is a justification for the seventh art. What were the previous six? According to the early film theorist Ricottio Canudo, there were architecture, sculpture, painting, music, poetry, and dance. King Kong demonstrated the supremacy of the seventh art and then made manifest the potential glories of the eighth wonder of the world. Yes, I do refer to Kong himself. Animation, the eighth art. If there was any film that I would actually be excited with the horrible cliche prospect of screening for a young child, ontologically formative and intensely impressionable, that film would not be The Wizard of Oz, or Pinocchio, or Star Wars, or Jurassic Park, but rather the original, the greatest, the unstoppable, the undefeatable, the sincerely unmatchable, the timeless and inimitable. Once King Kong was released, it unleashed an imaginative fervor which changed the world's consciousness forever, inspired so many attempted successes, and yet doomed them with the ironic fate, the cursed fact, that once the original movie, monster romantic epic, VFX extravaganza, island adventure, enchantment, escapist brilliance was conjured into existence, then nothing could truly match that original dynamic muse for composition. This was not meant to be an unignorable monster spectacle. It was meant as the unignorable monster spectacle, at a time when not even its own existence was believed possible. In proving for the first time that such a vision was possible, the artistic success, the emotive rush, the imaginative sincerity, the inspired purity, 1933's King Kong captured a creative magic which escapist genre epics to follow were doomed to imitate, inevitably fated to follow a formula, not to create one. This film is a reason to live, a tear-inspiring triumph.